Listen if you're missing, y'all. Swinging while I'm singing. Giving what you're getting. Knowing what I knowin'. While the black band's sweating. In the rhythm I'm rolling. Gotta give us what we want. Gotta give us what we need. Our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight the powers that be. Fight the power. 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 We got to fight the powers that be. As the rhythms are starting to bounce with houses that go on. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Kinetic Resistance. My name is Amanda Adams-Louis. I, along with Brian Polite, are one of the organizers of this panel discussion. Thank you so much for being here and being with us this evening, afternoon, day, depending on your time zone and location. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. We just want to make sure that everybody's in and situated and comfortable, and we will start introductions and the panel in about 2 to 3 minutes.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for Kinetic Resistance, Street Dance as Protest, a panel discussion organized by Cut the Rug Institute. My name is Lillian, I'm the programs manager with Q Art Foundation, and I wanted to get started just going over a few housekeeping notes. First of all, this event is being recorded, so please keep your video off and rename yourself using an alias if you'd like to protect your privacy and not be included in this recording. Please also keep your mic muted tonight to ensure the best audio experience for everyone. Feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout the event. We will be collecting all submitted questions throughout the evening for a Q&A period that happens after the panel discussion. There are also live captions available. If you click on the CC closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and select show subtitles, you can view those. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the organizers of this event, Cut the Rug Institute, a research-based artistic practice dedicated to developing and distributing creative products and scholarship about street and club dances developed between 1970 and the present. Cut the Rug Institute takes the form of a cultural think and do tank built to advance the conversation and information available about street and club dance forms. So please join me in welcoming Amanda Adams-Louis and Brian Polite, the co-founders of Cut the Rug Institute.
Peace and good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well today.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Cut the Rug is definitely a COVID project. Brian and I had been talking about this for a while, and we decided to kind of hit the go button and start Cut the Rug in spring of 2020 because we were stuck inside and talking a lot about street dance and its history and its culture. And we really just wanted to create a platform to share information with multiple groups and connect brilliant people that we know and don't know doing work in various forms around street dance. Thank you all for coming.
Just as a shout out, we also want to recognize a whole lot of people. Everyone read fast, there's a lot of names. We're not gonna drag you through all of that, but we definitely want to recognize Mark Silky Jones Robinson. About a year ago, Cut the Rug initially it started as a planned podcast that ended up not manifesting. But Silky was a part of, one, he came up with the name and he was a part of the initial build. And so when we decided to come together and rebuild the idea as a think tank, you know, we decided to kind of keep that same core idea of culture, community, and collaboration alive. And so Cut the Rug Institute was born out of that. We also want to recognize the dance ancestors, Marjorie Smarth, Voodoo Ray, Tyrone Proctor, Don Campbell, and Ifeya Sampson. And and basically thank you all. If you recognize any of the names that are on this thank yous list, then you are thanked as well. Special shout out to the dancers of It's Showtime for their support.
Thanks, Brian. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator. Naomi Bragan is a dancer, writer, educator, and activist. Her 2014 essay, Shot and Captured, links the policing of Blackness to turf dance memorial films in Oakland, California. In the 1999 WTO protests, she danced in the streets of Seattle and DC to intervene in police aggression tactics. She's writing a book, Black Power of Hip Hop Dance, on kinetic politics, about Black movement aesthetics, which have contributed to the emergence of a global hip hop and street dance. She's a former Bay Area Isadora Duncan Best Choreography nominee and NYC Hip Hop Theater Fest Future Aesthetics Artist. Thanks, Naomi.
Hey everyone, great to see you. Good afternoon, evening, wherever you're signing in from. And yeah, it's great to see folks just activating the chat. We're definitely gonna keep, vibing off of your questions, your comments, your ideas. That really helps us going as, as participants, co-participants in this culture. So for sure, use the chat actively and respond to what you're hearing, what you're feeling, what you're thinking about. And that'll just keep our conversation going, vibing and marinating. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We gather together today to acknowledge that we are living and working on unceded ancestral lands, including those of the Coast Salish peoples, including Suquamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations, the Munsee Lenape of Mannahatta, the Canarsie and Rockaway of Wampanoag, Tongvaland, and shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed. We are grateful to be guests in these lands and commit to solidarity and struggle for Indigenous sovereignty. We pay respects to elders past and present. The land acknowledgement reminds us of our connections and indebtedness to the peoples, original place names, and all our more than human kin where we live and work. Saying their names and learning their histories calls their spirits to life. And also you are welcome and invited to put our street dance ancestors in the chat, those who inspire you and those who move you. So one more just suggestion for folks as we go ahead and go through this event. In order for you to have the best, like the optimal viewing, we suggest that you hide non-video participants and keep your video off for the length of the event. So the way you do that is basically, if you don't know that feature, if you go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see the menu bar, there's a button called Stop Video and a little up arrow. If you go there and you click your video settings, you can scroll down and you'll see a feature that says Hide Non-Video Participants. If you check that, so it'll basically make the box blue with a check mark, and then press stop your video. Then you will be basically hidden and you can have the best viewing for the rest of the event. So we will be sharing screens, and then when we get on the panel, you'll just be able to see all the panelists at once. So yeah, great. Thank you so much. And we're really excited. I'm so honored to be in conversation with all of the folks in this room, really. And especially very grateful to be, part of this event with the expertise of Amanda and Brian, as well as the Q Art Foundation. So I'm just gonna start off with our first, actually, Amanda, could you quickly remind me who the first person is and just put them into the chat, because I don't want to start with the wrong person. Is it Shamel?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so wonderful. Dr. Shamel Bell is a mother, community organizer, dancer, choreographer, and documentary filmmaker. She received her PhD in Culture and Performance at UCLA's World Arts and Culture's Dance Department and is currently lecturer of somatic practices and global performance at Harvard University and lecturer of African and African American Studies at Dartmouth College. Shamel researches street dance movements in South Central Los Angeles. An original member of the Black Lives Matter movement, she began as a core organizer with Justice for Trayvon Martin Los Angeles and works as an arts and culture liaison for several social justice organizations. She consults for social justice impact in the TV, film, theater, and music industry. Welcome, Shamel.
Hello, hello, hello. So I wanted to ask first, I know that we have a video that we are going to show, but I just wanted to know if we could all close our eyes and do a quick breathing exercise. I never do anything without breathing, so will you humor me in that, please?
Yeah.
Perfect, right. Okay, so if we could just close our eyes and honor the native land that we're standing on. I'm in South Central Los Angeles right now. So I am on Tongva land. We just follow our natural breathing. We're just gonna take 3 deep breaths in. Just breathe in, 1. Release. Breathe in another deeper breath. And release. In our final breath, I want you to breathe in the freedom that we are already embodying. Breathe it in. And release. Right, and so I would love for you to go ahead and start with the video and then I'll talk a little bit afterward.
Got you. Can everybody see my screen? All right, I'm gonna take that as a yes.
Street dance activism provides an entry point to engage the onlooker. And with this level of intrigue, then see what our message is. I'm a PhD in culture and performance at UCLA, and I study dance and the intersections of art and activism. Racism is embedded in American society. We've never been post-race. As one of the original members of Black Lives Matter, it's just really important when we're seeing so many images of Black death to remind ourselves we are here to live. I teach street dance activism as an intervention. We were holding and taking space in front of the LAPD headquarters. I didn't want us to just be solemn. I wanted us to live in that space. As we're dancing together, we are lifting frequencies, we're lifting vibrations. I think the American political system should be a choreography, having all dancers welcome, like we do in street dance activism, right? We have a particular end, that beautiful dance piece. It can be used for gay rights, environmental rights. It can be for any type of social justice issue. We want this beautiful dance piece of liberation. All right. So thank you so much for watching that. So I'm just going to do a brief oversight of what you saw, but also talk about this moment where when we were in front of the LAPD headquarters and I saw the police officers or just the people that were passing by yelling like, "Cops' lives matter," or I remember there was some kind of cyclavia or some kind of march that were, not a march, but they were jogging by and there was a whole bunch of people and they were looking at us while we were outside and they were saying like the most outrageous things like, "I think that all lives matter." And when we began to dance, something completely different happened. What I saw was that people began to stop and engage us. And I realized at that moment, it wasn't for us to be a performance, but I wondered what the difference was of us dancing. I saw the police officers do something very different too. Honestly, they got kind of scared. And I was just like, oh, so you're more scared of us being in our joy and dancing. And that was the moment I was like, wow, there's something powerful in this. But what I felt as someone that, I don't know if you all know the terms like clairsentient or clair empath. I know you all have heard of clairvoyant, like where there's a psychic, right? And so for me, I felt the energy shift as someone that always feels an energy when I walk in the room. I know that there's some of us out there, you can kind of tell that something has happened. You walk into a room and you don't know, you haven't heard anything, and you're like, whoo, it's heavy in there. And that's what I felt every day. And so after we danced and people came and they asked, what were you doing? And I said, you know, you can come in, you can have a class. What I found that is so important about this moment is that I wanted to tell people it's not that what we are doing is any more respectable than what someone that is what they say being aggressive and yelling at the police. What I said is not for outside gaze, really. What it is us lifting those frequencies that I was saying, but also a spatial intervention. And with this spatial intervention, I, you know, had the idea that we can do this as a way of healing ourselves. So it is a spatial intervention, but it's also a transcendence that's happening, right? And so with this transcendence, which I think is incredibly key here, is that it's not for outside consumption, really, right? It's this idea that our living and our joy is the resistance, right? So that's why I love the name of this panel, because and what we're doing right now is a global dance meditation based off of, so street dance activism has now become a movement, right? And so when I was with the movement for Black Lives, we were, and where were we at? In Ohio at the convening, and it was in person, and we did our own versions of street dance activism there. And then now to see that there are people dancing all over the world, and let's be clear, I'm not the first one to dance at protests, right? In the Black Lives Matter movement, I just created that as a lane for us to use as direct action. So we were outside the mayor's house. We were also, you know, in marches. We were also, you know, doing it in workshops, because it's also a strategy for community building. So I teach it in a tutorial as well as a workshop, because it gets to kinship. It gets to the fact that there's not just one choreographer. I never teach it. You know, I co-choreograph it, is what I ended up saying in my dissertation. So we co-choreograph together in kinship circles based on the intent. The intent in street dance activism is what is key. So are you dancing for Black lives? Are you dancing for healing? Are you healing alongside others? So right now we're having a global dance meditation based off of a dream that I had 2 years ago. And so 2 months ago, not 2 years ago. So 2 months ago, I saw us dancing all over the world for Black liberation. I shared it with a couple of people, and now we have 40 people organizing, and we put together a 28-day meditation, and we are dancing and embodying that liberation in our body. So we're not necessarily, you know, struggling and fighting. There are people doing that, and we are doing that. But what we are now doing as well, we are healing so that we can get as light as we can to shift into the most optimal timeline, while also doing the action. So we're doing the action within ourselves, but doing the action as well with organizations that are on the ground doing the work. So yeah, I think that's, you know, my time, but I just wanted to talk to you all about what does it mean to embody that liberation, not to think about striving and being it, but literally heal together and focus on what it looks like, smells like, tastes like, to actually live a free life. So thank you for listening. And I see Grace from the Street Dance Activism fam here. What's up, Grace?
Thanks so much, Shamel. Yeah, that brings up so many questions around like these keywords of street dance and protest. And one thing I'm just quickly going to highlight is Shamel mentioned how street dance changes what's happening in the street. And I'd also like, it just makes me think like, how does our protest change in the context of street dance? You know, like how does street dance change how we actually do protest? So that's maybe something I might be asking you about in the
I'm ready for it. I was trying to make sure I didn't go over time. So I was like, and we lift vibrations and we're healing ourselves. So I was going quickly, but I'm ready to get into it.
All right, nice.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm just going to quickly explain to folks, because I forgot to say earlier, that what we're going to do is highlight each of the panelists. They've selected videos that are really important to thinking about their study and their practice. So we're going to show videos and they'll talk about their videos each individually. And then we're going to open up the entire panel of 6 participants and we're going to have a kind of roundtable discussion. After that, we're going to get into questions from everyone who's in the room. But you're welcome throughout to just put your comments and questions into the chat. And we do have someone in the background, you know, putting the questions into a separate document so that we can then field those questions. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get to everyone's questions, but we're going to do the best we can. So just remember to keep the chat going. And so I'm going to go on to our next panelist, who we're very honored to bring into the room. James Cricket Coulter is globally renowned and respected in the street dance community and beyond. He is a founding member of Rennie Harris Pure Movement and has worked with the company for over 16 years. During his time with RHPM, he taught and performed internationally, including in Rennie Harris's Bessie Award-winning Roman Jewels, and led the educational outreach programs for the company. Cricket teaches at hip-hop festivals worldwide, as well as at the American Dance Festival, the Bates Dance Festival, and Jacob's Pillow Dance Festivals. He's been a featured dancer in Step Up to the Streets. He's toured with Madonna and Chris Brown and has performed in music videos, including for Boyz II Men, KRS-One, Will Smith, Eve, Avril Lavigne, Fall Out Boy. Cricket has also hosted MTV Japan's Dreamers television show. So welcome to the stage, to the Zoom stage, Cricket.
You sound Cricket.
Hey, thank you for having me. Yeah, I guess after they show the video, I will yap some more and then get into you know, what the video is, and then yeah, I'll talk some more after that. Start yapping after about a minute. So the reason why I picked this video, this per se, was it's a lot of the videos that I'll wait until the sound goes down. Hello? Hello? Oh. All right. right. I picked that video per se because a lot of the footage that is, out and about of most dancers, it's very polished. You know what I mean? And people are using it, as networking tools for work. But I requested with my crew, the Crazy Natives, I was like, we need to put footage out of getting back to the essence of what we do in hip hop, and what we do as crews, which is we play. And in play, we find our tools and our dialogue and the things we use to express ourselves. So any form of art can be used for protest, visual art, music, and dance. A great portion of my life was spent in Rennie Harris Pure Movement, and through Rennie, I learned how to utilize dance as protest, dance to say something politically, dance to help people who have no clue what's going on in Black culture, in Black neighborhoods. It gives them insight. And I didn't know how powerful dance could be until I saw Rennie, because I was, when I was in the company, Rennie was kind of our mentor. But when he did a dance performance, he did a solo piece called Endangered Species. And he just it's him dancing over his breath. And he's doing a part of his life, a very deep, personal part of his life. And first time I saw it, I started crying. And I noticed that people in the audience were crying too. And I didn't know that, aside from that, I thought of dances only, especially Black dances, just purely entertainment. But now, from that point on, after seeing Rennie do that, I understood the power. And I was a devout student of that approach and of Rennie for years after that. And then going on to see, Rennie make deeper and deeper work and inspiring me to use my dance. And mainly, and I think Rennie didn't know this, because I just spoke to him, I think in the last couple of weeks, that he empowered, he not only empowered, he mentored. And the thing is, I don't think a lot of people know that Pure Movement, everybody gives Pure Movement the label of like this, Black dance company and blah, 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 and yada, yada. But we started out females, white, Black, Asian. But through the universe, through what happened, we ended up being the manifestation of the company that became famous or popular. It just happened to be we were all Black males left. We were the only people left. And we just, so, but through that, he empowered young Black males to use their dance. All of us left and mentored all the stuff that Rennie taught us. And there's so many young Black entrepreneurs, so many young Black males that are trying to, and females too, but that aren't just looking at the dance as just, just as a financial. You know what I mean? We're trying to say something with the dance, and I think that's super important. I'm at 6 minutes. Should I stop, or what's going on?
Yes, you can say.
I have my clock on. I didn't want to run over.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm monitoring like 4 chats. I appreciate that. Transitioning to our next speaker.
Yeah, and I'm just really quickly going to say I was just so excited when I saw this clip that Cricket chose, because it kind of is like, it's so different from Shamel's, and it's like, okay, it's on a stage, there's no like surrounding audience. Even the depiction of the cipher, like folks are just kind of in this really deep meditative place. They're not doing the typical like, hey, So it really forces us and challenges us to think more deeply about what street dance is, if it isn't necessarily in the streets, if it's on the stage, you know, and if the cypher is like, it feels very internal and meditative and brings in a lot of these kind of like spiritual, I feel like more spiritual aspects of why we dance and how our dance is linked to our liberation. With that being said, I am super excited to introduce our next honored guest. Dr. Imani Kai Johnson is a professor of critical dance studies at UC Riverside. She researches Africanist aesthetics, global popular culture, and ritual and social street dances. Her manuscript, Dark Matter in Breaking Ciphers, Africanist Aesthetics in Global Hip Hop, is with Oxford University Press. She founded and directs the incredibly successful and important Show and Prove Hip Hop Studies conference series. Welcome, Imani.
Hi, thanks for having me. Super duper nervous. So we're going to be watching footage that I am not in, so don't look for me. And it's more of a trailer style. Yeah, and I'll talk after. So whoever has that footage.
Montana, the untouchable empire, baby, Coke boy. They said be careful what you ask for, because when you get it, you know what you're gonna tell them.
You can stop it there. Hello. So I'll wait for you to stop sharing screen. Are you sharing screen? So just to start, I initially prepared too much, which is my way. I'm an academic, and then I realized I had much less time than the little bit of time I thought I had. So I cut dramatically in the last 20 minutes. So hopefully this still makes sense. And I might have cut it to where I even have less time. So we shall see. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I am happy to be in a conversation organized by friends that I admire and with folks whose work I respect. My prepared thoughts are in response to actually a series of IG videos posted by Rounds of Flame, a dance platform that serves the street dance community by creating occasions to gather and unify across street dance styles. And Amanda actually hit me to them an invitation to be part of this conversation. And I picked the trailer primarily because it showed a range of clips, and frankly, I couldn't decide on just one. But I think the trailer also captures aspects of both how street dance circulates online and how the medium of videos both amplifies and masks aspects of the culture's most powerful dynamic. Rounds of Flame's initial post announced that select dancers would be invited to prepare a, quote, 2-minute round against police brutality and oppression. And so the trailer from that special BLM event entertains and captivates, but it also shapes viewers into kind of spectators of street dance's raw, confrontational, and provocative qualities. The music overdubbing the clips of dancers attempts to amplify that energy of the moment for those not in attendance, and the compilation of cypher rounds delivers a sense of mounting intensity. But those who participate in these spaces as dancers or as active witnesses recognize what's lost in the footage, the sometimes lulls in between rounds, the feel of being in that space, from the sun shining down to the smell of the now potentially infectious air. The exchange of energy between people, the ambient sounds, and the chorus of voices responding to the moment. And so this is a quality that I think makes street dance deceptive in a kind of way, which is to say that the visual is powerful precisely because it distracts viewers from the kinesthetic qualities that define the space. It masks the subversive qualities of this kinesthesia and what it means to actually move together in shared knowledge about how to even do that, which is to say, in the depths of street dance's offerings. In this political moment, those offerings are wrapped up in looking beyond the spectacle. And so it makes me think about jokes about who Black people invite to the cookout. And there are a few other clips in there that touched on those qualities. So for example, there's a electric slide clip to specifically Frankie Beverly and Maze's Before I Let You Go. So in those instances, there is something in that joke about who Black people invite to the cookout resonates for me, because within the joke is a simple truth that you can't trust just anyone. The idea of being invited to the cookout means that you know how to be in the space with Black folks. There's a willingness to learn how to be in that space, how to help create and protect people in that space. So the invitation to participate, while in certain ways extended to whoever kind of sees and witnesses and wants to be down, it requires a certain kind of willingness to succumb to the dynamics of a space. The cookout is symbolic of a safe and familiar space. It's also sacred and thus exclusive to who can maintain its safety in a kind of fun way. The cypher, I think, captures that on the street dance scale. And in a moment when we are finally having a public conversation about anti-Blackness, one that is continuing to agitate for long needed change, to invite you to the cookout, to a sacred space, is a kind of risk. When the moment of public interest wanes, so too might that support. And so the invitation is both to participate, not just in the moment, but to learn how to be in relationship to each other in the cypher as a way of being in the world. And social media amplifies the practice in videos, but the invitation isn't just to join in and do that dance or those dances, but to learn how to be in that space, in this culture, and in community with each other. So those are my comments.
Yes, yes, yes. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Imani. Yeah, and I was super taken, as I am by watching a lot of street dance videos, how the music, the sound is overdubbed, and it's like you can see that there's something live going on there, but you don't have access. Mm-hmm. And Shamel, I was so fully, it was echoing what Shamel had said at the beginning about, not for just for anyone's not for outside consumption.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was really wonderful. Thank you so much. And again, a completely different new context. So moving on to our final honored participant and panelist, Shireen Shea Rahimi is a first-generation Iranian American dancer from the Bay Area. Her dance journey began with training with the late Gary Kendall, founder of Jabberwocky's crew, before his passing in 2008. In 2012, Rahimi moved to New York City to train in Vogue and gain a deeper understanding of underground ball culture. With the blessings of Omari Mizrahi and Jack Mizrahi, Rahimi joined the House of Mizrahi and spent the next 7 years competing in women's performance and best dressed categories. She also learned Afrobeat and traditional West African style, studying under the direction of Omari Wiles. She is currently company manager and dancer with Les Ballets Afrique, overall overseer of House of Arichi, and overall USA mother of the International Kiki House of Angels. Rahimi has worked in the entertainment industry for over 10 years, interning at Clear Channel Radio with Jidenna as dance coordinator and production manager, and in the ballroom scene. She coordinates the OTA Weekly, which is a mini ball series considered to be the new Vogue Nights. Her goal is to take Vogue to her mother country of Iran and organize dance battles for the Iranian dance community. Please welcome Shea.
Hey, y'all. Man, it is such an honor. I'm still gagging to be on this panel. Thank you, Be Polite, for having me. My video is a bit longer, and I'll get into it once we show it, but it's something that a handful of us here in the Bay Area created for Pride Month. So here we go. Yes, you like that? You like that? All right.
Elevator.
I'm so sorry, everybody, about the sound. I'm going to restart. My apologies. I just got that horrible text. If you've ever done a Zoom, you know where I am right now.
This is a coordinated activity happening across this nation. And so we are in a state of emergency. Black people are dying in a state of emergency. My hands go up and down like elevator, elevator, up and down. Nobody goes up and down like elevator, up and down. My hands go up and down like elevator, elevator, up and down. Nobody goes up and down like elevator, up and down. Your truck, I rode. Your truck, I rode. Your truck, I rode. I go, down. Your truck, I rode. Your truck, I rode. Your truck, I rode. I go, down. Your Vogue. Now, get your truck, I get your truck. Get your truck, I get your truck. Get your truck, I get your truck. I vogue, vogue, vogue. Down, Get your truck, I vogue. Get your truck, I vogue, vogue, vogue. Ow, get your truck, I vogue. Get your truck, I vogue, vogue, vogue. Ow.
Hey, y'all like that? Yeah, so story behind this video. It was Pride Month, and you know, being that time of year where Vogue is like extra cool and popular, we were asked to commission a piece for a few different Pride screenings that were happening in San Francisco. So we actually almost passed up the opportunity because out of respect to the protest, because the protest started happening at the end of May, and you know, Pride was right around the corner, but considering it was Stonewall's 50th anniversary and Pride started as a riot, it was only right that we, you know, had this opportunity to respond. And the inspiration came from seeing the art and care that had went into the work after the initial protest. We really wanted people to know about that side of the uprising and the arts coming out of the uprising, and really change the narrative around the looters and opportunists that we were hearing a lot of. I know personally, I have distant family members that were giving me that kind of shit of like, oh, you guys are just out here looting and looking for, you know, opportunities to, I don't fucking know. But anyway, so it was a lot of that, and these communities are hurting themselves. That really fueled us to be like, you know, really show this message of care and community, and how quick the artists of Oakland and the Bay Area were quick to reclaim their block after you know, downtown Oakland was, you know, ultimately destroyed. What happened was, you know, we were driving and we turned down and we see this 15, 20 blocks. What you guys see in the video are all of the murals that went up like days after the protest. So, you know, they didn't show you the art that was coming out of the uprising. They didn't show you, you know, these dancers and artists coming together and really reclaiming their blocks. They didn't tell you how So Oakland raised over $100,000 to, you know, to help the local businesses. There's so much of that wasn't included, and really we just wanted to change the narrative. And for this, we actually had asked David X. Johnson of Wackalicious to highlight the sister style and also pay tribute to his mentor, Tyrone Proctor. So that's somebody we actually, and you know, usually ballroom, we don't really like to mix voguing and whacking because people confuse it so much, but it was only right. And, you know, and David is everything, and he represents it the way it's supposed to. And it was only right that, you know, we included that portion in this for Tyrone. Really, I have to shout out Karma, gorgeous Karma Gucci, because she is the women, the group of sisters that you see in Chicago in heels on pavement that are voguing in front of the police cars. It was their ripple effect that had started this and had got us start going out to these protests with our own speaker, and kind of create this moment of healing, but also being like, let's make sure we include all the names when we say Black Lives Matter, all of the names of the folks that were, you know, Nina Pop, you have Tony McGade, you have all these folks that are not being included. They are trans.
I wish I had looked to see which one was longer.
Huh? Sorry, what? Oh, but yeah, that's it. So that's what that was. Yeah, it's a collective of just the Bay Area ballroom family. There's a lot of folks that couldn't come out, obviously because of COVID, but that is what we were able to create. But yeah, so here we are.
Thanks so much, Shireen. Yeah, so before we go on to the panel, which folks can definitely, who are on the panel, all the panelists can, you all are welcome to turn on your videos so we can all get into the room together. And I just wanted to recap really briefly just the abundance of where street dance goes and how we understand street dance and how we define it and how we use it and all of these like rich contexts, as well as the rich scope and expansive communities of folks who are involved in this really complex culture that's been going on for plus, oh my goodness, like 50 years, really? And still young, right? 50 years ain't that long when we think about Black liberation. So, you know, I was just really taken by the way that these videos both, you know, kind of show like the complexity, like they really show the complexity of spaces where street dance is practiced and performed. And also, I think suggests a lot of like interesting connections to maybe some that we don't necessarily immediately see. But I also heard a lot of reflections just in the way the panelists spoke about their materials, the importance of being there, like being in the now, like in the moment. That this dance is so much about you have to be there, you know. But of course, being there requires certain kinds of knowledge that's, as Jamel says, not open for outside consumption, and that you actually have to do work for, you know? You actually got to work to be a part of what's going on, and that work isn't like a one-time work, it's an ongoing work. And it's an ongoing work that happens in the context of, you know, urgent cultural change, happens in the context of major life transformations that we're all experiencing right now. And so it's really, I feel like paying, you know, respect to the way that street dance is this culture of the moment, and that we as creators and participants in that culture are constantly also changing and transforming that culture through our practices. So we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to open up just the panel first to have a group conversation. And if folks who are in the audience, if you switch your screen to gallery view, essentially, which is at the top button of your screen, there's like a speaker/gallery view, and once you click on it and it's in gallery view, it'll say speaker view, but you'll see all of our videos together. And do we have everyone here? We have everyone, right? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna start off, and I just feel like I always don't like to assume that people all have the same, or working from the same definitions, you know? And that's okay, like we get to be complex. So I feel like I would just like to start off with this general question of what and where is the street? And so just to give you a little idea of how I'm thinking about this question. So there's this kind of common knowledge amongst street dancers that the studio and the big D, the capital D dance institutions like the university dance program, the concert stage, the Hollywood industrial complex, you know, like, so you think you can dance XYZ, you know, right? We see street dance in all these places, like Cricket's danced in Step Up, you know, has danced in that series, you know, and we've got like the Jabberwockies who won America's Best Dance Crew, right? So we have all these places that street dance goes, but those places also have always exercised power over defining what dance gets to be and what dance doesn't get to be, right? And so we have this thing called street dance that comes actually from a Los Angeles-based history of being like, these dancers are dirt. Like they're the specialty dancers, but they're not like the real dancers, you know? And so there's that kind of tension of like, what is the value of our dance? And do we have to define it in relationship to something Eurocentric and also kind of elitist? So in this moment, this very historic moment of protest, you know, there's an idea that people are taking street dance back to the streets. We saw it in a number of these videos. But that also suggests that at one point it left the street, right? So what I'm just saying is there is this ongoing tension between the term street dance and where we actually practice it. So my question for the panelists is taking all of that into account, and I know that you all live and experience that and study that in your practices. How do you define the street in your practice and or study of street dance? And does street dance have to be literally in the street in order for the dancing to be a form of protest? I will also type that into the chat just in case you're like, I don't remember the question. Okay, so let's get into conversation.
You can go. Oh, no, Cricket, go.
You sure?
I was just going in the same order, but
All
go
right.
ahead, Cricket. I will defer to you.
I feel you. Let's keep it the same order. So, you know what I mean? So you can go first. I'll go second. We'll just keep that order.
I didn't mean to.
Nah, it's dope. I like that.
Yeah, no, so street dance to me is really interesting because wherever I am, there's street dance because I am street dance, right? And for me, I'm teaching at Ivy League institutions, but I'm teaching about street dance too. So street dance is going to be in there in a particular way. And because for me, there is this distinction between, and I did it to myself too, like, oh, I'm not a real dancer. I never say like I'm a trained dancer. I'm always like, I'm a street dancer. And if you put dancer, I go in there. I think I even did it on this panel. I was like, can you put street dancer in there? You know, for me, it's did I do that night? I probably did. But it's to me, it's kind of like gangbanging a little bit. I mean, a lot of stuff comes back to gangbanging to me. You know, South Central, and for me, is redeeming what gangbanging for me. It like I used to in the beginning of my my studies. I used to try to say that street dance was an alternative, or you know, and I at the end of my research, damn near published, was like, ooh, I didn't mean that word like that. You know, for me, it was just we needed to understand that street dance and gangs came out of a necessity for our basic needs to be met in a situation. This is for me and the folks that I dance with, right? So the real issue was that we didn't have access to resources. We didn't have safe recreational spaces. And so we danced, right? And then like how power was enacted. And so when you're becoming a Crip or a Blood, or if you're someone like me where we, you know, get to be in between zones, you know, because family and kinship, I thought that we need to be able to recover what is kind of like a neoliberal way of thinking of what even gang culture is. Like, gangs saved my life. The idea of having, and that's what street dance is. Like for me, it's breaking up into cliques. Same thing as gang culture for me, you know, having a kinship. And, you know, for me, I just wanted to make it, I'm not saying anything about violence or anything like that. I'm just saying the need to have, you know, family, community. Imani said it, you know, like, so for me, I'm always going to be South Central wherever I go. So wherever I go, I'm going to be a street dancer. And if I'm doing street dance, I know you saw in the video that I was at a museum at one of those places. And that became, street dance then became a modality that was for healing, but also street dance became a conduit for transcendence. And that can also be done on the stage. You know, and what we're doing in this global dance meditation, through our embodying, through our movement, street dance is social dance. So for me, I just had to change the way that I judged different terms. So I don't even now, I'm not like, well, I'm not a modern dancer. I don't like to do that. So why can't Black people be modern dancers and be with it? You know, what is this needing to label and needing to, you know, have duality? And like, I just decided to release and be more compassionate and know who I really am. And I'm someone that the streets taught me to dance. And so that's where I go, and that's when I make spatial interventions, and I'm doing those social dances, those street dances that people have. And if we talk about appropriation in any kind of way, you know, that people have kind of taken on. But for me, this is equivalent to being, and this is real funny, y'all, my home language for my PhD is Ebonics. I got it signed off on. I did a petition so that people can go after me, because when you are a PhD, my research is in Black culture, right? So if I need a foreign language, even though I had 3 levels of college level Spanish, I made a point to say, no, my home language, if someone that's doing Indian dance can say my home language is in Indian, or I don't want to say, I don't want to mess that up, but you know, whatever the language is, I should be able to say that African American vernacular that y'all have books on is my foreign language. It's my home language. It's not foreign. And so that is kind of the gist of what I'm saying about being a street dancer. Wherever I go, that is my home. I don't know if that made sense.
Work petition.
I heard it, and people are now like, oh, I'm doing research on Black culture. So African American vernacular, this is for my same community, home language. Yes, set precedent. And I hope that me being, you know, anywhere I'm at, you know, when I graduated with a PhD, I was crip walking with my son. It kind of went viral, but Amani's like,
that's the first dance step I ever learned, was the sea walk.
listen.
The first thing I ever learned.
So yeah, I hope I didn't talk too long, but that was just my idea of wherever I go, there's going to be street dance because I'm street dance.
Right.
Word.
I take, it's weird, the term street with me, because I was doing it when it wasn't cool, when it was just released. You know what I mean? And I'm talking the 80s, and this is behind my sisters who were older than me that were dancing to R&B. You know, hip hop wasn't even popping. You know, hip hop was popping, but this is the time when, you know, there were Prince, the Gap Band, the SOS Band. It was all these, you know, Alexander O'Neal. There was all these popular R&B, and all, you know, a lot of dancers don't realize that a lot of the steps and social dances I was seeing over people dancing to R&B, and it trickled into hip hop. But I'm trying to just, you know, get the terms or try to get everything on the same page, so you know that, you know, whatever label they give it, street, hip hop, you know, I not to say I don't have a say in it, but I just take it because it's street dance. All right, cool. That's what we're calling it now. Because I was doing it before we were throwing labels on it, and the labels come because of commerce, because they want to package it. There's this, you know, need, okay, we have to put it in this thing so we can package it. You know, I had older, you know, friends of mine that were doing music and stuff like that. I would say stuff like funk, and they would look at me like, what are you talking about? And I was like, funk, you know, funk. They were like, that's R. Can I curse? Is it all right if I curse? They were like, that's fucking
yeah.
Like, that's fucking R&B. What are you talking about? That funk shit came out of, they needed a label in the record store to categorize this version of R&B. It was R&B, it was rhythm and blues. You dig what I'm saying? So that's the same thing when we start, you know, because I was around when, before everybody was putting the label of street, they were putting all of us under hip hop, you know, poppers, lockers, vulgar. It was just, oh, that's just all hip hop. But then it was like, oh, okay, that's not all hip hop, because, you know, people don't do it. They're not doing this to this kind of music. So then, oh, okay. So then it's all street. So the label changes based on, how can I say, like, once we get into the power where we can, or we start claiming power, and then we start saying, nah, man, the label is this, then, you know what I mean, we're exercising that power. But for now, you know, if it's street, okay, it's street. If it's, you know, because, you know, I was in it. So in the 80s going into the 90s, I was skateboarding, I was going to punk rock shows, I was hanging, my friends were graffiti writers, I was an illustrator. So I was like, my friends I was drawing on clothes, my friends were doing cut and sew stuff, my friends were making stuff for Vogue Ball. So we're all just, a lot of my friends were making like all this stuff that's now becoming like mainstream. people are making millions of dollars for. Me and a lot of my friends were ground level for this, and they didn't know what to call it. So they just started lumping. I mean, there's a documentary right now on Netflix about, you know, the fashion, all the fashion stuff that was erupting from hip hop. But you know, I feel weird because I'm like, that was homeboy or homegirl's approach to fashion, and we're inspired by what we're around. And what Shamel is saying also is a lot of this stuff comes from community. It's community based. It's, you know, it's in my community we do this. You know what I mean? And this is, you know, this is what I was around in my community. And then we leave the community, we come back to the community for almost like okay, community's working on this. I take this, I go home, I'm inspired by what I have around me in my crib, around. Then I come back to the community and I redeposit it, and then people say, no, that's whack, or they say, no, that's good. And then that's how we come up. And to me, it's like a sense of the learning is real because you can't fake it. You can't memorize. Shamel couldn't just memorize it and replicate it and bring it back to the community. And when I say community, like the cypher, the club, the dance space, whatever the fuck. When you bring it back and they say, yo, that's fake, that's whack, you're not digging. You go back, okay, I gotta go back and you know what I mean? So it's real. You can't
rock.
You know what I'm saying? So that's why so the street term to me, it's you know, whatever, you know, people from this, black people and people from that class, because you know there's a lot of classism involved, because coming up, man, it wasn't just all black kids. There was some white kids, there was some Asian kids, there was a lot of Latinx with us coming up when we was doing a lot of this stuff. You know what I mean? That it's labeled street now, skateboarding, the fashion, the music, you know what I mean? And then I'm gonna like end it with where to dance. Again, it's wherever we laying it down at. Like, look, they closed all the dance studios down. Where was we all doing? We was doing it in our rooms, in our cribs. We live. If you're from the community and you live and breathe it, it don't stop. You know, a lot of dancers were freaking out over the. You know, I don't panic when it, you know, because it's never gonna stop. If the coronavirus got crazy and God forbid, everybody in New York died, this hip hop shit ain't gonna stop. Somebody's gonna, you know, it's like this street, this hip hop, it's a virus. It's the best virus ever. Because when I saw it, all I wanted to do was this shit. When people overseas see it, they get a taste. All they want to do is this shit. Yeah, I mean, I almost feel embarrassed when I get paid for it sometimes because I love this shit so much. I get paid to dance. I get paid to fucking draw. I get paid, you know what I mean? I get paid to just do what I love to do. So it, like, in terms of where, I'm agree with Shamel. I am this shit, and when you come into this shit and you contribute, you become this shit, and you wear it, like your skin, like your eyes, like this hat. You know what I mean?
Okay. So the what and where is street dance. When I started my research, everything was just called hip hop. So I always called it hip hop. Street dance is actually newer for me as a term, and I more so get it from Naomi because I know you and I read your work. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's, you know, broader. And I understood the problematics of referring to everything as hip hop. So I didn't mind the shift, but I still hold on to hip hop in no small part because street dance can also be, if we're thinking in a global context, a term that refers to a whole range of different practices around the world. And when I mean it, I'm referring to those dances that used to fall under the umbrella of hip hop, even if they weren't quote unquote hip hop, but essentially dances that are fundamentally informed by Africanist aesthetics. And that's not about who participates or who's allowed to participate or who's what race when they're not. Everybody who's brought into the folds of the cypher is brought into the folds of Africanist aesthetics. And part of the power of those aesthetics is that they're meant to be fun and appealing and entertaining and exciting. And they're seductive in that way, precisely because on the other side of that seduction are lessons about how to be in the world. And so street dance to me is a useful term in that it captures, it's not a solely literal term. It captures aspects of the public nature of street dance, a kind of, qualities that are relatively egalitarian with regards to class and race and wealth and capacity and all of that, relative to other kind of dance forms. And it marks, to me though, it marks more of a sensibility rooted in an awareness of the urban working class, Black life, and the needs that those conditions produce, similar to how Shimon was talking about it as a modality. So yeah, the where of street dance is not necessarily, though it can totally be literal, but that if it's a sensibility, it's how you carry it everywhere, as has already been stated.
Okay, there, I'm unmuted. Hey. So when I discovered the term street, so I first was doing hip hop, right? With actually Gary Kendall, who was the founder of the Jabberwockies. Just side note, I don't fuck with the Jabberwockies. I only mention them because of Gary Kendall, because no one knows who Gary Kendall is unless I mention them. But that was my teacher. He was a B-boy. He was the founder of it. And unfortunately, due to, like homophobia and stuff, the Jabberwockies, for whatever reason, choose not to talk about him. But anyways, so Gary was my first teacher, and he was a B-boy. And I had only spent a good 5 years with him, and he really taught us foundation, but we were in the studio. Shortly after that, I was on what I thought was a hip hop crew at the time, but now I would look at as a choreo crew. Because in California during the ABDC, America's Best Dance Crew, that whole era, it's what I thought was hip hop, what I started with transformed, and it became tick, tick, boom, right? Everyone looked the same, everything was becoming the same. It's no shade, it's real, that's what it was. And I remember calling Gary and I was crying because in that hip hop choreo crew setting, it was, you have to look like the instructor. Your pinky cannot be any different. You have to match the body size of the person you're mirroring. And if you look the wrong way, you're not in the piece. So from a raw ass B-boy to that was whoa. I remember I called Gary Kendall and I was like, what the fuck? I don't understand what this is. And he was like, look, if you're not having fun dancing, you don't need to be doing that. You're not in the right environment. You need to get away. That's what he had said to me, you need to get out of that kind of thing. And, granted, I stuck through it and it's no shade to them. It was great training, but really it's when I moved to New York, I was like, oh, I found street dance to be kind of I don't even know if Vogue, I don't really I get confused with labels, and I don't know if I consider Vogue a street style. I think it's kind of street club, but if you go to the pier, you'll see the kids, they're in the streets, definitely. But it's but it's also its own thing. So I get a little confused with labels, but all that to say, when I went to New York and I really saw what I discovered to be street dance, I discovered freedom in movement and expression, and the complete opposite of what I was taught in a choreo crew, which was you need to look like everybody else. It was no, you need to tell your story in your own expression, but know your foundation. What is your style? Yes, you have to know your foundation, period, above all. But now how do you tell your story given the foundation that you know? How do you, and it was, who was it? It was somebody at Libation. Oh my God, I remember when I first time I went to Libation, I was like, oh my God. It was a spiritual experience. That's what it was. And coming from California, Naomi, you already know, coming from California, that was what? It was a whole different experience. And I remember someone was saying to me, I was watching the cypher and they were like, are you going to get in? I was like, no. And they're like, you're just going to watch and not share? And I was like, oh my God, I felt so attacked. And it was true. It was you can't just, it was this street dance is in this very much community, very much not just finding the inspiration, but also sharing the inspiration, and ultimately being free in yourself, your individuality. You're telling your story and who you are and where you come from, not trying to look like the next person. So that's how street dance came into my life, and what I discovered it to be was this freestyle / this freedom ultimately in movement. That's all.
Thank you. Well, y'all touched on just about a lot, definitely. It's great. Thank you so much for being so articulate and just really being able to go and connect all these different kind of dots about what the street is. I just wanted to quickly flag, someone had mentioned, oh, Shamel had mentioned this thing about about gang life and like this, how it's really about a question of access to resources. And I just wanted to point out, especially in this moment where a lot of what we're doing is actually informed by disability justice work that they've been doing, because, you know, folks in the disability justice community can't necessarily go out in the street, or it's been hard for folks to, like, say, get to work if you have, you know, disability concerns or access-centered concerns. And even if you think about movement, access-centered movement, which is a term that's been created by a group of folks that are based on the West Coast. I'm mainly thinking of Neve Mazik because I'm in Seattle where Neve is based, but there's also a couple of folks, Jess, and I can't remember the other person in Oakland. It's really important to remember this link, this kinship between the idea of street dance and disability justice, you know, because street dance does have a different kind of more expansive, I think, way of understanding just what the body is and what dance is. And, you know, access-centered movement has always been about challenging the idea that there is a standard, right? That there is a standard body that, of course, ballet, you know, immediately comes to mind, you know, or that there's a standard dance and all the other dances are derivative. And so I just wanted to momentarily flag what Shamel, what you have brought up around access, because again, we are really trying here, we're saying very clearly that it's not just about being in the literal streets, and that protest can take its form in many different places and in many different ways, especially important for folks who are protesting beyond the streets, or maybe who can't be in the streets for a variety of reasons, which I don't even think we need to like elaborate on right now. So yeah, thank you so much for that, for responding to that question. I'd like to move on to the topic of protest and policing, because of course, especially this particular you know, moment that we're in right now. And so, you know, dismantling policing and incarceration as fundamental structures of US democracy is at the center of our current protest movements. And so street dance has this particular potential to highlight relationships between policing, between Blackness, Black movement, and culture. I feel like these are already kind of coming up. They've already been coming up. Imani talked about, you know, Africanist aesthetics. And some folks were like, oh yeah, is it Black? Is it not? What, like, how are we even talking about Blackness? And then also we have to talk about all the ways cultural policing is happening a lot, you know, like there's, you know, people throw around the word appropriation all the time, which, I mean, personally for me, I feel like the conversation has to go a lot deeper, because, you know, syncretic cultures has always been a part of what folks have done. But, you know, there is a concern when you're talking about structural power. What does it mean when folks take on different cultural forms? And are there sort of ethical obligations? So, you know, when I talk about policing, yes, I'm talking about state power and how we're actually confronting that in the streets, but policing also happens at this microcellular level. And a lot of the work, I know that like Shamel's work with the Global Meditations has to do with really investigating and reflecting on how we become our own police. Not just that we experience police violence done to us, but we begin to police each other, and we begin to imprison ourselves. And so, and I feel like a lot of this, you know, this work that we do as activists around spirituality and spiritual practice also gets to these kind of microcellular levels of policing and violence. And so my question for the panelists is, how does a culture of policing, or just policing in general, show up in the dance world? And you know, this is again really wide. These questions are very wide ranging. You can go literally to the street. I mean, Shamel, you've already given examples. Or I think, no, it's Shay who talked about the Voguers, like literally dancing in front of the police. you know? So it can be to that literal, definitely let's bring in the question of the literal concrete streets because protesters are putting their bodies on the line. But also, you know, how are other ways that this culture of policing shows up in the street dance world? And, you know, how can street dance be a resource for confronting these questions?
Right, yeah. So I did talk about it as well. Just marking that I only have about 7 more minutes because I have to hop off. So it's not because I don't love y'all. I have to go to the Global Dance Meditation meeting, actually. So our meeting's at 4. And so some of the folks are going to hop off too. But basically, for me, you saw that, you know, I began to think about what I could offer at the LAPD headquarters while the LAPD was, you know, being like harassing us outside as we were there for 18 days, having what we were at the time was calling Occupy LAPD. But then we said we were decolonizing the space, and then all of this language is shifting. You know, we would do it outside of the mayor's house, and then the police would kind of just stare at us. But what I think about when I think about policing as far as in other ways, like we police ourselves. I love that how you're talking about that. I police myself, and I would always say, you know, I'm not the kind of dancers that they are, and it was in like a kind of like self-sabotaging way. And it came backwards for me because I'm just going to quickly talk about how we were in the comments. We were talking about the professional like Millennium Dance Studios and all of that. Because I was a street dancer and because of who I was around, you know, the folks that were crumping and clowning and all those folks and being in Rise, I got a dance agent without auditioning. So I was a part of MSA, and they were sweet. They were the best to me, but I would see how other people would be auditioning for things that I was always in rehearsal. And I think you were talking about how you weren't quite, ticks weren't right. I was dancing my little heart out, and I was known for at the time doing all the street dances, like from every different like places. If you're from a different community, from a different state, I would learn your dance. I remember when I first learned the chicken head, I was like gone. I was turning and I was whipping and I was like out there, right? So they would see me, and then I would get these jobs because I was you know, just killing. And then I would get there and they'd be like, yeah, Shamel, can you turn that down a little bit? Because they have people who've been dancing for, you know, Janet Jackson for 30 years. And I'm just giving an example. And, you know, there was some, but they pulled me to a side and they was like, don't let it get you down. I love that about you. And I'm so grateful. And his name was Richard. I think Richard Jackson. I'm going to make that up. Maybe because it was a long time ago since I was dancing, but I know I was dancing with like people like Chuck Maldonado, like all these, Teresa Espinosa, and you know, other people who are like, not saying that they're just in the pocket, but it was like so big names. And here I am, this little South Central girl doing any street dance that I knew. And so at that point, when people were going to the auditions, and realizing that we were already in rehearsal, I was telling them they wanted one, like for casting purposes, maybe they wanted an Asian person. I was helping in casting. I was interning at the same time. And I was like, we already casted for that. And so when I understood how it became this commercial thing that Cricket said, I left. I left when I was getting jobs over Miss Prissy, who was the creator of Crump, the Queen of Crump, and I was like, hey, how am I, this don't seem right. So it was a part of the reason, like I policed myself, but now where I'm at is that, you know, I'm open up to movement expression in the ways that I find it for liberation. I will dance for the liberation of myself and others. And that's where I'm at right now. So the policing is kind of like, I kind of let it go. But yeah, I hope you all understood what I was trying to say and all of those things.
That question is so broad, but I'm gonna try to tackle, you know, okay, growing up, little kids, you know, fireman, astronaut, police, you grow up looking at these things. And you, as a Black kid, you have to learn the hard way, you know, because you're looking at, oh, it's the police, fireman, astronaut, you know, whatever. And then you hit that wall of like, bro, you're going to have a real difficult situation with these cops. And it started when I went to 7-Eleven and I bought a cap gun. And my parents freaked out. And I couldn't understand why they were freaking out. And, you know, I was like, I'm about to get beat up. I'm about to get beat for having a cap gun. I was kind of perplexed. And my parents were freaking out. Like, I'd never seen them freak out over like something. So I was kind of like looking at them like, yo, and then my parents had to explain to me, I was like 9 or 8, you know, and they had to explain like, listen, the cops will think that, you know, that you're a bad guy and will shoot you. And I'm like thinking like, the cops aren't going to shoot me. Like, the cops are good. And my parents had to, and then watching the news, my parents are now go, he needs to know. My parents are calling me in every time something happens on the news. My parents are calling me in, like, watch. Then we were living in the suburbs. We moved from Philadelphia into the suburbs. You know, now we're getting pulled over just for coming home from, you know, we're coming from Philly from my grandmom's house. We're getting pulled over. They're fucking with my dad. So now I'm looking at the cops like, yo, what is going on? You know what I mean? And this is happening on multiple occasions. So I had to learn about the complicated relationships between, because as a kid, man, you grow up thinking everything is, but depending on your environment, you learn the hardest way, you know, that about the relationship between police and black and people of color. You know what I mean? And then it ranges in the classism, because then I have friends that were Russian Jew. They were Russian Jewish, blonde hair, blue eyes. And we're hanging out in the club. And my friend, I don't want to name his name, but my friend is, you know, he's coming in the club late, roughed up. I'm like, what happened to you? He's like, yeah, man, the cops grabbed us up, took off all our clothes, tied me to a tree with my own belt and beat us and left us there. And then that's when I had to learn. And this is like, you know, I'm learning this because coming to the club, we're exposed to different culture, we're exposed to different things, that if you, whatever neighborhood you're in, that you don't have power in, the cops are preying on you. And that's when I knew how, like, goddamn, these motherfuckers are scummy. You know what I mean? Because it's like, okay, wherever we're at, that we can take up some power. Who's the less? Okay, the Russian Jews? Okay, we're gonna come down on them. Oh wait, okay, it's the Dominicans? Okay, here we're going, oh, it's the blacks here? Like, wherever they can claim power, they're gonna claim it. It's like a fucking gang. So, not all of them, but hey, most of them. Because if it was a great deal of them that was good, we wouldn't be having these conversations. So that was my little, and then you know, everybody's always noticed I always wear hats like this, probably as far back as you've known me. It's because of the cops, because guaranteed from the 80s up until the mid 90s, every time we went out to the club, anytime it was guaranteed that we wouldn't get pulled over by the cops, either going or coming. It was going to happen, period, point blank. If you had anything that you wasn't supposed to have on you, we was going to fight you, because we were just trying to make it to the club, have it coming home, but don't have it going. So one day we were about to go to my club. My friend Jose, he had a bunch of hats like this and Kangos that he got from a thrift shop. He throws them on the chair. He's like, yo, grab one. I was like, what's up? He goes, if we wear these, the cops will think we old and they won't pull us over. So we put it on. Cops is dropped. We didn't get pulled over once. I was like, bet, that's how I'm rolling. Because I look young for my age. So if I wear a fitted or a cap, I'm getting side eyes, I'm getting looks. So I keeps one of these on. That's my little cop force field. But, okay, so that's my whole little touch on, you know, cops. But policing and the culture is why I picked that clip. I picked that clip for 2 reasons. And I'm glad that Naomi picked up on the one. I'm super happy, because a lot of the dancers in my crew, I don't want them to think I'm crazy. Sometimes I'm like, and I never want to enforce, because everybody knows when we're working, you work a job you know, you work on a production, theater, like TV commercial, movies. It's a lot of power. It's a lot of power being thrown around. It's a lot of ego being thrown around. And I always want to be kind of like, I want to kind of put suggestions. I want to move it, but I don't want to be like these guys, like, you know, so I'm always throwing things out there. And when we did that video, I was like, we got to put out a video that shows the essence of where this is coming from. Battles are a part of it. It's not the full thing. You know, it's before the club, it's us dancing together. us, you know, a community of dancers dancing together. From that, the creation happens. And just like Naomi said, everybody's in a trance because we're in the cipher, the circle, the dance space, and we're just fixated on each other and we're creating. And bro, I mean, spirit and instinct wise, that's the only freedom that we had when my grandfather's father was a slave. The only freedom that was to be had was when you sang, when you danced, any kind of creative thing. Is like, okay, you can't fucking police me here. I'm gonna do it the way I fucking want to do it. You know what I'm saying? That's why Little Richard is screaming out the top of his lungs, and it, you know, it changes from R&B to rock and roll. All these changes happen because, you know, and I'll make it brief from here. It's like, and also I wanted to use that clip because when I was coming up, man, it was all about style, not styles. Meaning, yo, you look fly. That was it. And the thing was coming when we were breaking, I wasn't dancing when everybody was in the 80s, when everybody was breaking and popping and locking. I was social dancing. I was, you know, trying to meet girls. So I was dancing. I just wasn't doing that. And I would see it. And you got to understand, when I say what I'm saying, I'm talking about I was like 10, 11, 12, because we had school dances. So, you know, I wasn't like some old dude. That's why I hear people go, oh man, you. I was like, man, the OGs to me were like 16 and 17. That was an OG to me when I first started dancing. So, but when I started getting into the dance, it was all about, if you looked like you were breaking, they would clown you. Like, yo, get out of here with that old school shit. You was popping, get out of here. You know what I mean? It was about our style. So that's why you see, and this is all over the United States, we got to understand that it wasn't, New York and LA are commercial capitals. That's where the cameras are. That's where the money, media money is. So it's easier for somebody to, when Stretch and them were younger, to grab them up and put them on TV, or Don and them to grab them, because there were street dancers all over the United States, nasty as hell, pushing it for the sake of not for, you know, street fame, man. Like, you know, like in the culture, you wanted to be like, yo, I've become a woman, I've become a man because I've commanded this art form that was given to me from my community. You dig what I'm saying? So I've always held on to that. But as we move on into, you know, it becomes about money. And, you know, we have to sell these certain things. You know, I tell people all the time about battles. I'm like, if you're going to enter a battle, you are submitting to that criteria. You know what I mean? So if you lose, don't get mad. That doesn't, you know, we're not judging you as a dancer. This is this criteria. Like, so I think people are kind of going into these battles thinking that that's going to define them as a dancer. Nah, that's defining you in battling. It doesn't, you know what I mean? Because you have to limit it. You have to limit it to a certain level, unless your journey is, okay, I'm gonna push the boundaries. Cool. If you lose, don't get mad, but push the boundaries. Know that you're pushing the boundaries. You might not win. You know what I mean? But that policing but go back. I'm going back to the clip. In the clip, yeah, let me get it. I gotta go soon too. But in the clip, I'm experimenting and playing with the movement. You know what I mean? And I tell kids and whatever, there's gonna be a time and a place to follow the rules and be police. But then there's a time, okay, I gotta get out of here. Okay, I'm done. If you wanna know more, please hit me up on various social media platforms.
Great, thank you so much. I feel like Shamel and Cricket touched on a lot of what that conversation on policing just opens up. And yes, it's a complicated conversation, not supposed to be an easy question. Sorry, folks, no easy questions. But, you know, this panel is not about necessarily finding answers. It's about asking questions and continuing to ask the questions and be curious about this culture. So we're going a little bit over, but I really wanted to briefly touch on global street dance. And I'm going to ask Imani and Shay to respond to that, because I actually feel like y'all's work has a lot to say about the question of global. So just briefly to frame, the US, as everyone's been saying, is like a super intensive marketing mechanism, which works flawlessly, even as it is so effed up. Still is working quite well as a marketing mechanism, and it often promotes the idea that Black culture is produced here and transmitted outside in this one-dimensional linear way. But that formula has also mapped onto protest movements, and suggesting, well, the radical protests, happen here, and then other folks learn from us. But we forget in all of that, the Black Panthers were studying movements in China, in Vietnam. They were studying anti-colonial liberation struggles throughout Africa as they were articulating their party platform. So I just would like to briefly talk about global street dance and liberation. So the question in the chat is, what inspirations globally have inspired your study? You can actually go even more, I think, to the second question, which is, how does your study and or practice of street dance relate to Black liberation as a global practice? For example, Shay, I know that you would maybe be able to talk a little bit about your plans to go to Iran, and Imani, you also talk about global ciphers and battling. So maybe if you could briefly talk about that and to bring us home.
You're welcome to go, Shay. Take it.
Okay. Yeah, globally, I'm really inspired by the community in Iran, the dance community, specifically because they do not have the freedom that we have here. They have a lot of government restrictions around dance. Women are not allowed to dance in the same room as men. They have to cover their hair. They're not allowed to have really dance jams. Even only men are allowed to battle. And yet they still create spaces literally under the ground so they could come together and they can jam, and they make it work. And I'm really also very inspired by them because they make sure to stay informed with the education, and they're really on top of it, having so many restrictions. They can't hire instructors from out of the country. Instructors can't go in there. All they have is VPN codes to break the internet and watch videos. And even on the anniversary of hip hop just the other day, I saw more people of the Iranian dance community posting than I did here in America. And it just reminds me constantly just to be really grateful for what I have here, what we have here, and the spaces that we have. And it's not like that in a lot of other places. And I do feel like in America we take things for granted. But I can't talk so much about what I'm currently doing because it's technically not legal over there. But yes, we, a handful of Iranian Americans, are organizing because of US sanctions. We can't send money in and out of there. Like I said, there's no outside contact. And some of the Iranians and the people around the region, not to name names, are doing some online battles, but again, because they're not able to reach out to folks that we know here that we see on a regular, they're not able to work with them. So a handful of us here in California and New York are working with some folks that we know. I'm not gonna name any names though, they're in our community, and we're actually setting up an online battle for that region over there. Because one, we saw that there were folks on that side of Europe and all that, volunteering their time to judge. And it's like, oh, that's cute, but they shouldn't be judging. So, as being Iranian and being that we're in this community, we're like, let's help you. Let us help you guys. We can help fund some of this because we're here. We can help connect you guys with the right people that rightfully should judge and rightfully should be teaching you guys, because granted, we can't come in and out. So what's the next best thing? Internet. So that's what I'm doing. That's my focus for the most part right now. And also, I guess now I can announce this. So ballroom, voguing has always been a form of resistance and a form of protest. These people just walking the streets and being themselves is a form of protest and resistance of what society wants them to ideally be and is expected of them. And really, especially in a time like this, we're taking the opportunity to do some renegade style protest balls. And we're doing the America is Burning with the K, America is Burning ball here at Oakland Lake Merritt, where it's gonna just look like a demonstration, straight renegade style, bringing out folks from New York. And really the purpose to educate as we entertain, because folks are coming for the entertainment, even if they want to come for the protest and support, yay. Ultimately, it's our responsibility to make sure we are educating just as much. We are providing resources. We're not just saying, oh yeah, support businesses. No, here's a list of businesses you can support. It's right over there. So just making sure that we educate as much as we entertain. More, actually. That's where I'm at.
That sounds amazing. My relationship to global hip hop is very different. So I'm gonna more so speak through my research. When I started my book project as a dissertation, it was always meant to be, or I was inspired to be a kind of philosophy of the cipher, which is to say I wanted to understand the dynamics of the cipher, of the circle, and figure out ways to carry some of those lessons differently, or, you know, outside of that space, in no small part because I'm not a dancer. I'm not someone who identifies as a dancer. So, but I knew and have learned from the cipher and being an active observer participant in those spaces. And so the project itself started out as an exploration of circle practices in the African diaspora. So we're already operating outside of a national context. That's number one. So when I talk about Africanist aesthetics, I don't just mean African American in the context of the US under a certain historical trajectory, but I mean the diaspora. And in the process of doing that research, what I recognized was that even as folks were learning, folks outside of the diaspora learning some of those underlying Africanist aesthetics that say, because it was new for them, it wasn't being reinforced in other aspects of everyday life, like it would for people of African descent, and, you know, just in how they're doing things. And I know I'm speaking in broad generalizations, but work with me because time. I recognize that as I travel to see and engage with ciphers in other spaces, what allowed folks to enter is that there's already so much happening that I think that there's like room for one's own kind of cultural embeddedness to create a path in. So if you're coming out of a culture that already had a kind of competition back and forth, there was something resonant in that. If you're coming from a culture that already kind of valued at improvisation together, or that emphasized the importance of rhythm or things like that, there was already something familiar or resonant in ciphers, and then in the practice of participating in hip hop, learning even more how to participate in that space. And I'm thinking of specifics that we don't have time for, but all that to say is that what became really clear is that one of the lessons that hip hop taught me and that ciphers taught me was that point of entry, wherever you're coming from, is brought into the conversation. I'm thinking specifically of something like Halifu Osomari's concept of connective marginalities, which is to say that people recognize their own struggles, their own concerns, their own anger, their own kind of fight against certain structures in the practice. And that recognition of self allowed a point of entry that spreads, that expands, that grows as both they learn to play in those spaces, and then they bring in themselves, they bring in their culture, they bring in those histories, they bring in those tensions and put them in conversation. And it strengthens, strengthens the critique, because the critique is never then contained to any one place or any one nation or any one group of people. There's whatever that resonance is of the something shared, and then being brought into the folds of the practice, which thereby increases that something shared. That to me is a really powerful intervention that street dance offers, and is, I think, at the heart of any kind of coalitional politics. How do we recognize each other's struggles and share in that, so that your struggle is also my struggle? It matters to me how trans people are treated. It matters to me how Palestinians are treated, because that's part of myself, my world, my understanding. And I think street dance helps to, it can help to facilitate that level of understanding.
Thank you so much. That's actually just such a perfect way to wrap up this panel. And I think especially to put all of what we're talking within the context of thinking about Blackness and thinking about really like honoring this moment in terms of like how are we entering these conversations. These conversations are not just exclusive to Black people, and that's actually part of the problem when people, you know, there's like this kind of rhetoric of, oh, you know, this Blackness is exclusive. It's like, actually, it's radically inclusive, y'all. You know, which doesn't mean we still have to be aware of how we're entering the conversation, and we're ethically obligated to that. But as I learned from Tweety, as Tweety says, like, what are you saying? You know, what are you saying? You need to be able to say what you are saying. Don't just speak and no one understands, right? And so really, Imani, I feel like what you're getting at is like, how are you entering the cipher? You know, and when you enter, what do you have to say? Like, we want to know what you have to say. And it actually takes work to say something and to say it clearly and to say it, you know, to be able to communicate it to the folks that are in that conversation in that moment. You know, it takes a lot of different kind of skills. So it's not just skills you're going to get by dropping $15 for a dance class. It's not skills you're going to get for dropping $15 for a dance class for a year. It's not skills you're going to get dropping $15 for a dance class for 10 years.
Where a class is $15?
No, okay. I know, I'm dating myself. No.
Okay. It's like 22.
I know, right? Okay, well, whatever.
Sorry. That Groupon.
The point being, though, is that we are indebted to our culture, you know, that it's really about a debt that cannot be repaid. And rather than thinking that it's not to say you don't pay. Of course you pay, you know, and of course we honor, and we have our ways of tributing and honoring and also supporting, right? You know, because yeah, we do live in a capitalist system, so hello. Can't get out of that, right? But at the same time, trying to act as if it's just a transactional kind of relationship is really what we're getting at here, the kind of anti-Blackness that tends to erupt and erase a lot of these practices and not really honor and value them for what they are. So I would like to just now first thank very profusely the incredible work and practice and dedication of all of the panelists today. I know some have left, but they're out in the ethers dancing their lives away. And just to say, you know, these conversations are going to keep going and growing because we got Be Polite and Amanda in the house, and they are making the Cut the Rug Institute happen. So I'm going to take it out and let them give their thanks and close it out, y'all. Thank you.
Love you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Be Polite. Thank you, Imani. Thank y'all.
Yes, thank you all. This was a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Q. Thank you, Cricket. Thank you, Showtime. Thank you, everybody, for coming, listening, sharing, engaging in the comments. You can find Cut the Rug Institute on Instagram. Our handle is cut_the_rug. And we're on Instagram. Our website's coming soon, and more projects in the future. Passing the mic to B.
This is a dream come true. We are internally grateful for everybody involved. Take this conversation, keep having it, keep expanding it. This is the whole purpose of why we are starting this journey, and this is just the beginning. This is always an us thing. It is always an us thing. So you are a part of this. You're part of what makes this happen, and we will be seeing you all very shortly. Take care. Be nice to each other, and be nice to yourselves. Peace.
Thank you, everybody.